Welcome back to our confirmation study on the Ten Commandments. This week we're looking at, to finish out the unit, and we're looking at the 7th, the 9th, and the 10th commandments. Which at first glance, like we're just trying to cram a bunch of stuff into one. But when you look at the commandments, there's one thread that goes through all of these. You shall not steal, shall not covet your neighbor's house, and then the 10th one, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife, his manservant, maidservant, his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. So the action words here are steal and covet. And what's at stake here is, what are you stealing? What are you coveting? You're coveting and stealing that which is not yours. And so the word that ties all of this together is ownership. Is ownership. And the question we need to be asking ourselves as we look at the different issues of these commandments is, who is the owner? Is, if someone owns something, I shouldn't steal it and I shouldn't covet it. It's theirs. I should celebrate with them that they have it and find ways to encourage them to use whatever that they've been given in service to their Lord and to their neighbor. And they should do the same for me. So the issue is ownership. And that question, who is the owner, isn't just talking about our neighbor. It's not just talking about, well, when your neighbor owns something, don't try and take it from them. Instead, encourage them with it. It's talking about, what about your stuff? Who is the owner of your possessions? Of your family? Of your life? Who's the owner? And some pastors get in trouble with this topic because anytime a pastor seems to talk about finances, talk about money, a lot of people get upset. And they may not say this, but this is the thought that I think people get most upset about is, how dare he tell me what to do with my stuff, with my money, with my time? Therein lies the problem. Is we think that we are the owners. And if it's my stuff, I can just do whatever I want with it. No one can tell me what to do with it. But if I'm not the owner, not only can I not steal it, if I'm not the owner, I'm not supposed to steal, I'm not supposed to covet it. But if I'm not the owner, I'm supposed to help it to be used wisely, to serve Lord and to serve neighbor. And so we have to look into our lives, into our pocketbooks, into our possessions, into the things that God has given us, and recognize they are just that. They are a gift from God, and He is the owner. God is the owner of all of our things, and He has told us, manage it. Take care of it. Use these gifts wisely. God is the owner, not you. And the owner gets to decide what to do with the things that are owned. So we have to look to God and say, God, not just in these commandments, but throughout your whole word, what do you tell us to do with the things that you've given us? And so we see God has given us these amazing gifts to be used in service to one another. To use what God has given us to share with someone else. And so we tend to think, well, I don't want to worry about this thing called stewardship. It's a fancy church word that gets thrown around. To be a steward is another way of saying to be a manager. To not be the owner, but to be a caretaker of what the master, the owner, has given to you. And that's exactly what we are as Christians, is that stewardship is not just a fancy financial term that we use. To be stewards, stewardship, management, that's the life of a Christian. It's just what we do, is taking care of that which God has given us. So all of life is an issue of stewardship. It is an issue of ownership. It is who's in charge and whose rules are we following. So when I find myself, when we think, I don't want to use my time I don't want to give up my time to read the Word. I don't want to give up my time to serve someone else. I don't want to give my time to go on this mission trip to do this confirmation lesson. I don't want to give up my time. It's an issue of ownership. Is I think that I am owning of my time instead of God has given me these 24 hours today, and what does He want me to do with it? Is that God wants me to be in His Word. God wants me to be helping His people. God wants me to be taking care of my family. God wants me to be using this time wisely. So when we find ourselves looking at our finances and saying, God, I don't want to use my money in that way. I don't want to give this money. We recognize that God has given us these things so that we can use them wisely. And what God recognizes specifically in the area of finances is we think that we own our stuff, when in reality, oftentimes, our stuff ends up owning us. Or even the things that we don't yet have end up owning us. That our whole life is geared towards getting more and more and more and more. And that pursuit ends up defining and owning our lives. Is that instead of us owning our stuff, it ends up being the opposite way around. So God has set up this system where if I learn how to give of myself, to give of my stuff, to give of my time, I can recognize it's not mine, and I'm no longer controlled by it. I am free to live in this world. I'm free to love and serve my neighbor. So God set up this Sabbath day of rest to recognize that my time is His. God has set up the system of the tithe, of giving 10% of the first fruits. 10% is the base level. It says, give that, because it's enough to make a difference. That 10% could be used a lot in my budget to balance things out in my mind. But by giving that 10% as a first fruit offering to the local church, I'm putting my trust in God. And I'm recognizing that I'm not the owner, He is. And in doing that, in starting with that 10%, seeing how I can give more, that helps me recognize who the owner is, who's in charge. And it's a heart issue of trust. So instead of letting my heart be ruled by my stuff, I want my heart to be ruled by the Creator, the owner of everything that I have been given. So as we look at these commandments, as we wrestle with this idea of ownership, we have to keep in mind the whole scope of what God is doing on this earth. So as an illustration, I have a rope here. And if you can kind of pretend that this rope just continues and goes on for forever. This rope illustrates eternity. Illustrates the amount of time that we have, that we've been given as God has created us, that God has been in control, like God has always been. And if you look on the end of here, there's this little blue piece of tape. And this blue tape represents our time on this earth. And the rest of this whole rope is all of eternity, and yet we're so focused on this section. That meant if I really work hard right here, then I'll really be able to enjoy this part right here. Instead of living, well, if I do this here, if I give this, if I share this, then that'll impact the rest of eternity. Is that by using my stuff here, I can change the ending to someone else's story so that we can be together for the rest of the story. Is that by using what God has given me on this little blue speck that we call life on planet Earth, I can impact someone else's eternity. That's what's at stake here as we look at these commandments. It's not just a matter of, well, the church needs to pay its bills. There's people who need the ending of their story for eternity to be changed. And God has given you talents, abilities, time, resources to be used to share Christ with that person, to serve them, to share God's love with them, to build up your neighbor, to build up the church, to expand what we can do in order to impact the rest of this story. It is not all about this little blue section. It is all about the God, the owner, who impacts the whole rest of the story. We don't get to take our stuff with us. The only thing that lasts for that whole time is a relationship with Jesus Christ. And as we build that in our lives, we recognize the only thing that matters, not our resume, not our checkbook, not our grades, not our sports achievements. The only thing that lasts is Christ. So how can I make an eternal investment with what God has given me? How can I invest eternally with my time? Well, by being in the Word, by being in worship, by praying for other people, by reaching out to them with God's love, by serving them, by having family devotions, by looking at what does it look like for our family to be disciples, is how can I make an eternal investment with my finances? Is, all right, not just giving the 10% tithe to the local congregation, but what more can I give? What more can I give to various ministry opportunities that can use the gospel to reach other people, that can share Christ with a hurting, broken community around us? And then my talents, what can I do with the abilities and the passions that God has given me? How can I use that to build relationships with other people, to serve them? Is that if I've been given much, then I must be able to give much. If God has given me a wealth of resources, I can then generously give those resources. If God has given me a wealth of abilities in an area, I can use that to serve someone else. Because God is the owner, and as the owner, He has a great plan for us. He gives us freedom so that we are not owned by our things. We're not owned by our possessions, but we are free to use them for the greater good, for something that lasts eternally. Instead of just living for our little blue time on this earth, God says, invest, manage, be a steward of what I've given you, that it may last in eternity. That's blessings on your discussion today as you wrestle with what God has given you and how you can use that to make eternal investments in yourself, in your family, in this church, and ultimately in the rest of the world. Blessings on you this week.